Good evening, everyone. I think we are now ready to start. So there are no fire drills planned. If the fire alarm is activated, which is a continuous siren with a flashing a red light, please leave the building immediately following the fire exit signs. Now I have to read the rest of this, so just bear with me. The reason for urgency: this meeting has been called as a matter of urgency in accordance with section 100B (4) of the Local Government Act 1972. The chairman has agreed to hold a special meeting of Scrutiny Committee and accept the call-in as an urgent matter, as the agenda has missed the statutory dispatch deadline but has been circulated. The matter is urgent as the Council's constitution requires any decision called in to be considered by the Scrutiny Committee within 5 days of it being called in. It has missed the 5 days notice, as key decisions have 5 working days to be called in following the publication of the decision, which was on the 23rd of April 2026. Is that date correct? Not the 21st? Okay. Charlie, any apologies? Absence or
It's Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies of absence from Councillor Barnes, who's been substituted by Councillor Marshall, Councillor Edwards-Windsor, and Councillor Skinner. Sorry.
Thank you. Before we start, declarations of interest as well. Sorry, before we start. Are there any other declarations of interest that haven't already been declared? No. Okay. So I just want to read this, which is to guide us through the debate and the proceedings this evening. I think before members comment on or participate in this call-in process, I must formally remind all members of their obligations in respect of conflicts of interests and standards of conduct. Members are required to actively consider whether they have any disclosable pecuniary interest other than declarable interest or any perceived conflict that could reasonably be regarded as effective their impartiality in relation to this item. In considering this matter, members should be mindful that they are representing Sevenoaks District Council as a corporate body. Any observations, comments or decisions made therefore must be in the best interests of both the current council and the successor authority arising from the local government reorganisation. Members are reminded that decisions taken by this council, particularly those relating to the transfer of community asset, will be subject for future scrutiny, including external audit and review, notably by Grant Thornton. It is therefore essential that members do not expose this council or the future council to any financial, legal or fiduciary risk. Members must also act in the public interest and in the interests of the district as a whole. They do not act solely on behalf of their individual ward or any parish or town council. I'm aware that some members present this evening also serve as trustees of the Stag Community Arts Centre, where a member considers that this dual role could give rise to an actual or perceived conflict of interest. They should not participate in the consideration of this item and should withdraw from the meeting while it is discussed. The assessment of whether a conflict exists is ultimately a matter for each individual member to determine. However, members are strongly advised to take cautious and a transparent approach. As a reminder, members, if you leave during the discussion of this item, you will not be able to take part in the vote. And I will also ask, please, the Scrutiny Committee members, which are all on the right-hand side here, to avoid, please, any repetition. I'm sure you can be discerning in doing that, and so, and that is all I have to share with you at the moment. And I believe, Councillor Robinson, you are going to introduce the call-in motion. Or is that correct, the motion? Yes, thank you.
I'll be guided by you. Is it all right if I stay sitting down, or would you prefer I stand up?
I have no personal preference. If everyone else is happy, that's fine.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'll stay sitting down. Well, thank you everyone for coming this evening. You will forgive me if I read out my speech because I don't want to forget any parts. of
That's
it.
fine. Just remember, you have 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes starting now. Our role this evening is defined and limited, but it is critical to the lawful and effective, functioning of this council. We are here simply to determine whether Cabinet's decision on the 21st of April 2026 on community asset transfers was taken in accordance with the Council's policy framework and the Constitution. So this call-in is made under our Constitution, Appendix C, paragraph 18.4, on 2 grounds. First, that the decision is not in line with the disposals policy, 2025 to 2030. And second, that it was not taken in accordance with the decision-making principles as set out in what we call Part 2 of the Constitution, but I think it's actually Section 2, Part 1, but we won't quibble. Now, both grounds turn on one single issue, whether Cabinet had before it sufficient evidence and supported where necessary by the appropriate legal, audit and financial advice to properly discharge its statutory duties. I'd like first just briefly to turn to the national statutory framework on this. So under Section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972 and the best value duty under the Local Government Act 1999, a local authority must secure best value in the exercise of its functions. Now, best value is not a narrow financial test. Statutory guidance published in 2024 by the national government makes it clear that best value requires, and I quote, demonstrable continuous improvement across the following sectors: governance, use of resources, service delivery, and partnerships and community engagement. Now, in addition, the Localism Act 2011 establishes the context for community asset transfers. And these are not standard commercial disposals, but decisions about public value and community stewardship and local outcome. So the implications are fairly straightforward. A decision to refuse a community asset transfer must be supported by evidence just the same as for granting a transfer. And that requires evidence that refusal, in the case of refusal, improves outcomes, makes effective use of resources, and supports engagement with community partners. This is with reference to national legislation. Now, this evidential standard, in my opinion, was not met in the Cabinet papers of the 21st of April. Turning to our own framework, our Constitution, Section 2, Part 1, paragraphs 6 and 8, requires decisions to be taken on 4 grounds: proper information, proper advice, transparently, and with a clear audit trail, which I totally approve of as a member of Audit Committee. I can give you the detailed references, but our disposals policy goes further and sets specific evidential requirements. 1, a surplus assessment. 2, valuation or income analysis. 3, service or strategic need assessment. 4, a business case for the community asset transfers. And 5, a clear audit trail. Now, what happened at Cabinet on 21st of April? For the 3 refused assets, Hollybush, Market Rights, and the Horsefield, these requirements are not evidenced in the papers before Cabinet. What were presented were conclusions. What was absent was the analysis with the evidence required to support those conclusions. And this is not some technical omission. It was and is a substantive failure in the decision-making process. And it also raises a further issue regarding professional advice. In my view, where a Cabinet is minded to refuse a community asset transfer, it should also have before it appropriate independent legal advice, our external auditor's review of that particular business case, and a clear evidence-based position from our Section 151 officer that best value considerations, as defined by the statutory guidance, have indeed been fully considered. And on the material presented on the 21st of April, there is no evidence that Cabinet had before it that level of required structured case-specific advice. So what conclusions do we draw? The question for scrutiny is a simple one. At the point the decision was taken, could Cabinet demonstrate on the evidence before it that it had complied with its statutory duties as in the policy framework and the Constitution, and on the face of the record, it could not. And this absence of evidence cannot be remedied after the event. Can I have one more sentence?
Sentence.
The lawfulness of a decision depends on the information available at the time it is made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, I think now we to the portfolio holder who will give his response.
Thank you, Chair. I will stand. I need to stretch my legs after over-exercising over the last few weeks, a bit stiff. So thank you for the opportunity to open Cabinet's response to this call-in. My remarks this evening will focus on the decisions Cabinet took on the 21st of April and the process by which those decisions were reached, rather than the merits of individual assets or alternative outcomes. However, it's important to state that assertions that Sevenoaks District Council's community asset transfer process is not working are factually incorrect. Since January this year, 22 community asset transfer applications have been presented for decision, of which 14 have been approved by Cabinet for transfer, 1 progressed to disposal, and 7 were rejected because they did not meet the published criteria set out in the Council's disposals policy. The process is therefore demonstrably functioning as intended and has enabled the successful transfer of assets to a wide range of community organisations. On the 21st of April, Cabinet considered the Community Asset Transfers Report, following prior consideration by the Finance and Investment Advisory Committee and supported by detailed officer reports, appendices and professional advice. Cabinet resolved to approve a number of community asset transfers, to decline others and to defer 1 application, applying the same policy framework and decision-making principles consistently across all assets. The call-in is advanced on 2 grounds: that the decision was not in line with the Council's policy framework, in particular the disposals policy, and that Cabinet did not act in accordance with constitutional decision-making principles. Cabinet does not accept those assertions. First, on the policy framework, the monitoring officer has advised that the disposal policy does not form part of the Constitution's defined policy framework. Nonetheless, Cabinet was careful to apply the disposals policy 2025 to 2030 as adopted by full Council. That policy provides a structured framework for asset decisions, including community asset transfers, and makes clear that community asset transfer is not an entitlement, but a discretionary mechanism within the Council's wider asset management responsibilities. The disposal policy requires Cabinet to take into account the operational need, financial resilience, regeneration, and strategic significance, including the context of local government reorganisation. Where assets are assessed as operational, income-producing, regeneration critical or strategically required for the successor authority, the policy position is that they are not suitable for transfer. Cabinet's decisions flowed directly from that test. And I think that's very important to recognise. Secondly, on process, Cabinet's decision-making was supported by a clear, documented evidence trail, contrary to what's been suggested. All applications were initially assessed through the Council 2-stage community asset transfer process, including an expression of interest stage, designed precisely to ensure proportionality, value for money, and clarity about whether an asset was, in principle, capable of transfer. There doesn't seem to be any reference to that process. Officers assessed each application using recorded criteria drawing on submissions made by applicants, independent and officer valuation commentary where relevant, income data, service considerations, and the Council's adopted policy and strategy framework, including the Council plan, local plan, housing strategy, and regeneration objectives. Those assessments are documented in Appendix A submitted as part of the Cabinet report and were available to members in advance of the meeting. Cabinet received and considered professional advice from officers across property, finance and legal. Members were entitled to weigh that evidence, to ask questions and apply judgment within the framework set by the policy. Differing outcomes between applications reflect differences in asset status and evidence. Hence, Cabinet resolved to approve 7 assets to be transferred, 1 to Sevenoaks Town Council, 2 to Farningham Parish Council, 1 to Ainsford Parish Council, 1 to West Kingsdown Parish Council, and 1 to Hartley Parish Council, and 1 to Otford Parish Council. 3 applications were submitted by Sevenoaks Town Council, were declined for transfer, and a decision on the stag has been deferred. It is also important to be clear on the scrutiny's role this evening. Scrutiny is not asked to substitute its judgment for Cabinet on the merits of individual assets. The proper test is whether Cabinet acted lawfully within policy. Disagreement with the outcome of a policy being properly applied is not of itself evidence of procedural failure. Cabinet acted with the openness and clarity on the basis of written reports, published appendices, and recorded decisions. Information and advice was considered and documented. Where applications were declined, the reasons are set out by reference to policy tests applied that have been consistently and in the context of future unitary arrangements. In closing, Cabinet is confident the decisions on the 21st of April, as I should add that they are for the 8 assets approved for transfer or disposal on the 13th of January, were taken properly within the adopted framework and with a clear audit trail. Call-in reflects a disagreement with the outcomes of applying that framework, I would suggest, rather than failure of governance or process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have an opportunity now. We're not going to go into debate, but before I do go on to the next item, what I do want to do is just draw your attention to the papers that we were shared before the meeting. The process of the meeting as set out per the Constitution is set out in sections or paragraphs 4 to 16 of the papers today. We will be following those. Hopefully that will be of clarity. The next element of the proceedings tonight is to ask either the proposer and the portfolio holder any questions of clarification before we go into debate. Councillor Lehman.
Just on a point of order, Mr. Chairman, if I may, haven't we left out paragraph 7?
Did I leave out paragraph 7?
Well, I'm not sure we've had that stage yet.
I'm just saying that is the process of the meeting and the constitution of what I can't even say the Constitution, what the Constitution says, but that is not where we are at the moment. Oh, yeah. Okay, so I think that what Jim has just said to me that there was no indication that anybody else wanted to speak other than other than the proposer and the portfolio holder. Are you saying that you want to speak as for the? So I misread what you were saying.
I was expecting that paragraph 7 would give me that opportunity, yeah.
That's fine. So that's why I'm going through the procedure to make sure that we follow it. And I'm happy for you to, to stand corrected on that. So if you want to, again, you have 5 minutes also.
Thank you, Chair. And I didn't want this to be a sort of ping pong between the leader and the committee, but to give the leader opportunity to hear all the perspectives. But I'm just going to speak briefly, if I may, without repetition, about some of the points about using the Hollybush case study as an example, where so I think it illustrates the general point which Councillor Robinson has put before the committee. If you read the papers that went to the Cabinet on the 21st of April, the argument about whether or not to transfer Hollybush relies a lot on references to plans that the council has been developing since 2021 for that site, including plans for housing on the site. It says transfer of the park would materially constrain the council's ability to deliver housing and so on and so forth. So that's the evidence which the Cabinet had before it. There was then a conversation at the Cabinet, and it wasn't clear whether about plans for the site, and it wasn't clear whether that was a reference to those plans, which were not produced in except by reference, or that there were new plans were emerging. And that got referred to in the minutes by saying members were advised that improvements to Hollybush Recreation Ground were being investigated. So the position had changed. Then Councillor Maskell wrote to Laura Trott, who was interested in this, and made quite lengthy reference to the emerging plans, not the 2021 plans, but the emerging plans. And Laura Trott drew from that the conclusion that housing was part of the plan. But then a few days later, social media appeared from the council saying, and I forget the exact words, but words to the effect of there are no plans to develop Hollybush Rec. So my point is, telling that story, that there was confusing and conflicting evidence throughout this story, but it was a point on which the Cabinet was relying in order to justify its decision to decline the transfer. Incidentally, on Hollybush, there is dispute about, for instance, whether it is an income generator net for the council and other issues, and whether the depot can be utilised post a transfer in the way that it is planned for. So I think that adds up to, and I'd be interested in what Councillor Maskell says about this, adds up to on the face of it, clear example of how evidence is not being properly put together in order that the Cabinet can, in full knowledge of all the facts, take a decision and be able to justify it properly. The other point I was going to make was reference to the FIAC meeting, where I think Councillor Maskell was there and heard that there was a wide range of views, some positive, some negative about these transfers. And that's reflected in the minutes of that meeting. But there's no detail about what the objections were and what the detailed discussion had been. And when it came to the Cabinet meeting, I would have thought that was crucial bits of evidence for the Cabinet to take account of when it was considering weighing up its judgment. And I remember no discussion of the points that had come out of that FIAC meeting. It was framed in the way it was because Councillor Grint was very keen as chair of the FIAC committee to ensure that it could move forward collectively, but also in a way which recognised the variety of views that there were in the committee. That wasn't reflected then in the Cabinet discussion or its review of the evidence before it. So those are two ways in which I think this process, I'm not debating the merits of the judgment either way, in which the process has not facilitated good decision making by the cabinet in this case, and I think it probably no doubt applies to other examples as well.
Thank you. Do any other members of the Scrutiny Committee want to say anything with regards to the call-in proposal before I go to, Councillor Lindor?
Just quickly say one thing from what I've heard so far. Surely we are kind of debating the merits of the Scrutiny Committee's decision on Hollybush Park, High Street market rights and the land of Bradbourne Vale Road from what I've heard so far. It's the way it just feels to me.
We will be debating the process and the procedures around it, but not individual sites, because of the fact that it's all of the sites that went through the cabinet at the time. But it's now.
Okay with it.
Councillor Maskell, do you want to reply as portfolio holder, please?
Yes, certainly, and understand that what is being produced here is not what Councillor Lima was discussing here is not in relation to debating the particular site. What he's using it as an example. And I think what we're getting here is an example of where there is a misunderstanding again around the approach in terms of that Cabinet took and the discussion that was on around that. So, for example, in relation to the issue in Hollybush, which you raise, Councillor Lehman, is the activity in Cabinet where I thought it was being helpful to demonstrate, because as part of the discussion there was to indicate that development was not being proposed in that area, and that the council was not going about this approach because it was expecting development to take place. It was very much contrary to that, that I was putting that the council values that site to the extent that it was looking to look for improvements on that site, small minor improvements. I didn't actually mention what those improvements would be, but although I did say it enables greater access to local residents. So I think it's important that that is noted. So it was actually trying to be supportive of residents and allaying their fears. As for emerging plans, I'll hand over to officers, if I may, to identify the basis for emerging plans. As you quite rightly indicated, the plans previously are quite old. But there have, as far as I was aware to that point, I was not aware of any development plans or opportunities there. If I hand over to Sarah.
Yep, happy to, Councillor. So if I look at Hollybush Recreation Ground in terms of its proposal for development, in terms of improvement as leisure, and then I'll pass to Detlef that can then go through the assessment that was presented to Cabinet to help members. So Hollybush Recreation Ground is classed as a strategic site solely because of its vital role in current and future leisure and recreation provision. This designation of strategic does not mean or suggest that the site is earmarked for development, nor does it imply any intention to build on it. Its strategic value as a site for providing leisure and recreation is highly valued by the council, members and our communities, and it will remain protected through its public open space designation within both the council's current local plan and the emerging new local plan. The Hollybush site is an essential and ongoing operational use for our depot site. No plans have ever been agreed by this council to develop housing on this site, and there is income generation that supports the sustainability of the site over any motive for profit. Therefore, the recommendation to not transfer the site was wholly in accordance with the disposals policy. But if I pass to Detlef, he can go through the assessment so that members have more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the assessment documentation, it's quite clear within the documentation that it states there that the transfer of Hollybush Park would result in the removal of a strategic fixed asset from the council's balance sheets, the loss of both existing and future revenue streams, and the forfeiture of future capital receipts or enabling value. It would also result in a reduction in the council's capacity to fund capital investments without additional borrowing. We also point out that conversely, the retention of the assets would allow the council to unlock future income through lease regearing and renewals. We also highlight that the introduction of parking income to support revenue budgets, and also in addition to that, to protect the financial position of the successor authority within the context of local government or reorganisation. We once again go back to the tests of the disposals policy, that assets that are considered to be operational and income producing should not be transferred. That is clearly highlighted within the documentation that is included in here. The documentation also provides a very clear evidence base in terms of the income generation that is generated by the asset. And in addition to that, it also looks at the cost benefits in terms of the income, and also the income and also the operational costs associated with the respective assets. These are all included in the documentation that was in Appendix A, and in addition to that, Appendix D also includes all the detailed information that was submitted by the relevant applicants as well. Thank you, Chair.
The Appendix A and D refer to which meeting?
Appendix A and D are to the committee, are within the committee reports, both the ones that went to the Finance and Advisory Committee, and in addition to that, the report that went through to Cabinet.
Thank you.
And I just want to move on a little bit more to the reference to the FIAC situation. I mean, first of all, in relation to FIAC, I was actually present at FIAC, the FIAC meeting, and took on board comments that were made. As indeed, I think I can't actually recall, but I think Councillor Grint was actually at the Cabinet meeting following that as well, and had the opportunity to add to the information provided. There was a reference in the minutes of the FIAC committee meeting, which was before the Cabinet in terms of being available for deliberation, and there were references in the Cabinet and discussion around the disposals. The community asset transfers. I think it's also important to bear in mind the number of times that the community asset transfer is actually discussed by Cabinet members prior to it through the project management group, and through Cabinet briefing, and through FIAC, and through Cabinet again. So there are many occasions for that, and Cabinet is armed with a great deal, or has been provided with a great deal of information through the process, and the deliberations are around examination of that evidence. Particularly when we're looking at Appendix D, that is absolutely huge amount of information on how that information is assessed. I think that's covered that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Maskell. So before we go into debate, Councillor Clerk.
Before we do debate, are we able to ask? I know we said we could ask questions, but I've also got questions of the officers.
Yes, these are questions for clarification.
Yes. All right. Okay. So yeah, just a couple of things really. So the comment Councillor Robinson made, in her opening, was that obviously those making applications for community asset transfers have to abide by all these things, business case, et cetera, to produce that. Is it that does the cabinet or the when making the decision, do they have to produce equal and opposite information? So therefore have to produce the case the other way on point by point to nullify the points that the applicants are making. And I guess the other thing is for instance, if it's income generating or whether it isn't income generating, is it for the cabinet? Can the cabinet just decide? So it could be income, it may be not income generating, but could they still decide not to transfer it because they choose not to transfer it? I'm just trying to find out how much compulsion there is in having to do something. And yeah, so whether that case is right about, if the applicants have to put forward a case on all the different aspects, does there have to be an opposite case that deals with it all? Or essentially, can the cabinet make a decision because with all the other stuff that they've got, they can decide how to deal with it? Because for me, it's not a case of whether this decision was right or wrong, because we can all have different views on that, but it's whether we put it back again to go through the process and whether that is actually needed or not. Does that make sense? Maybe not.
I'll try and summarise it, and I think that Councillor Maskell will. You're happy to answer it straight away. He's happy to.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that. Essentially, and it's mentioned in various papers, community asset transfer is not a right. It doesn't have to be done. It doesn't have to be passed over. So the assessment is about the value of that asset, and Cabinet has to make a decision on the value of asset against the policy. It takes into account, obviously, the business case that's being provided by the relevant authority, and it assesses it in that light. So the officer's recommendations and details, I think the officers probably went further than we probably would need to, in that the case provided by the town councils or the parish councils were very full and asked for very fully. That was taken into account when measured against the officer's assessment. But I would suggest that to greater extent, the officers have gone over and above the requirements in terms of the policy statement there. Although I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, just in response to the question, as well as Councillor Maskell pointed out, as well in terms of the body of evidence that has been submitted, it's also really important to note that this isn't an adversarial process, that the process was one of actually looking at our policies in terms of reviewing those and seeing how we could work together with the respective applicants, whether they were town councils, parish councils, or even other voluntary and community organisations. So it is not an adversarial process of us having to provide a counter argument. The policy is very clear in terms of how it should be applied, in terms of assets that are particularly noted to have income generation are required, and in addition to that it makes it very clear in terms of those four points. Sorry, that escaped my mind right now. It's in terms of income generation, in terms of required for operational needs in particular. I think those are really two really important points.
Okay, thank you. So just to summarise that, my understanding is that that information base is in Appendix D of the Cabinet papers.
Sorry, Chairman, could you repeat that?
My understanding is that the information of their assessments was contained in Appendix D of the Cabinet Papers.
The assessment is contained in Appendix A of the Cabinet Papers, and Appendix D includes all the information that was submitted by the applicants that was taken into account.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Councillor Clack.
Yes. So again, going back to the fact of whether I agree with the decision or not is it's almost like a judicial review in the sense that a judicial review, you don't rehear the hearing again. You look at the process. So from what we've heard so far, and maybe this is an unfair question, so I accept that it may not want to answer, but do the officers or legal, do they believe that we abided by the process or that we didn't abide by the process? I'm just interested in a view.
So thank you. Just bear with me a minute. I think that
And I can start if I may,
Please do.
Chairman, this. So all of the reports that we bring together for community asset transfers are considered, as you will know, in all of the reports that go through an advisory committee or cabinet or council will have comments at the end of those which refer to financial comments. For the particular cabinet report that went through recently, that actually had a separate section 151 officer comment as well. Our legal team will provide their comments within the report. So there's a whole section of which is part of the standard template. So the answer to that is yes. All of those officers that were mentioned by Councillor Clack will all consider and put their views into the overall reports that are presented to members for decision in line with the disposals policy. Thank you.
thank you. Sorry. So are there any other questions of clarification from the officers before we move into debate?
Thank you, Chair. I leave it to the officers to decide who's going to. I have 3 questions. What exactly is there at Hollybush that is of such value that it would affect the District Council's ability, I quote, to fund capital investment without additional borrowing? What is there? This is what Detlev said. He said, it's a strategic asset which, if it were transferred, would reduce the ability of the District Council to fund capital investment without additional borrowing. That's just one question. My second question is clarification around the fact that it is noted as a revenue generating asset. I speak as a member of audit. It is overall a loss-making operation. So yes, it generates revenue, but can you confirm that overall it is a loss-making operation? My third and final question is, and this is really a much more important one, on the formal evaluation you undertake as officers, I suppose it's to follow up on Councillor Clack's question, do you do a formal evaluation that matches point for point what the business case says, so that there is scoring and evidence that you submit to Cabinet in a report on an identical basis? Because agreeing, not refusing a transfer is as important a process as agreeing to transfer, and they both need to be scored in the same way. Do you do that for those that are refused? Thank you.
Before we the officers answer, can you clarify whether your first 2 questions were procedural and process driven or specific? Or
So it was just a statement that threw me, rather, is that there is this statement this evening that Hollybush is a strategic asset on the basis, as I understood it, the justification for saying is that if it were transferred away from the District Council, and I quote the words, "It would reduce this council's ability to fund capital investment without additional borrowing." That statement suggests there is something of major value in Hollybush that would be set against that allows us not to have to borrow. And I'm just very curious to know what it is, because it is, I hope you'll converse, it is a loss-making operation. So I'm interested
not
to hear
sure that
where
that-
that assessment came from, because it's a statement made this evening in evidence for it to be a strategic asset. And I think what we're looking at is the evidence for the decisions taken.
Happy
And
to
so I'm
understand
curious.
that, but we should be focusing on the procedure and the policies, not just the specific cases. I will ask for a brief answer
you.
with regards to that, but I'm close to not, feeling that that is part of where we should be looking. Detlev.
Thank you, Chair. Just in response to the question that Hollybush is a loss-making operation, that is not the case. The evidence in the documentation, which is included in the financial appendices, but in the financial information in the documentation, and also in the assessment documentation, makes it very clear that Hollybush Park does generate a revenue stream, and we've also taken into account the costs and also the revenue, the income generation that it generates. So that is included in the documentation. It's very clear from that it is not making a loss. In terms of the first comment, in terms of the issue around potential improvement, development potential, however you wish to phrase it, what needs to be viewed is that Hollybush Park there's actually several comments in the documentation that refers to asset optimization. And what's very clear in the documentation and from the assessment that officers have made is that the way the layout of Hollybush, the way Hollybush Park is actually its current layout needs to be enhanced and improved to enhance access for local residents and to provide that opportunity. Now, the council has not made any decisions on any future plans on this particular property, but what we did have was in initial concepts in terms of how do we improve and enhance the recreational opportunities for residents within this estate. And that is what we're focusing on. And that is what we mean by the issue of preventing future capital generation or opportunities around that, is looking at this entire estate holistically so that you can potentially unlock opportunities on that site. And those opportunities do not necessarily mean the type of development that has been proposed by councillors at the moment. As pointed out, there are no detailed plans for this particular asset at this point in time.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of clarification?
Yeah, sorry, we're both really clear in this. We follow the process that's been adopted by full council, which is within the disposals policy. So each application, which within the appendices that both FIAC and Cabinet will consider, you'll have two appendices. The two appendices that Detlev mentioned are assessments together with the business cases that have been put forward, and each one will be reviewed through the same process. So it is the same for each one. Thank you.
Thank you. It's only questions of the committee. Sorry, Councillor Shay. Councillor Lindop, did you have another question? Because I know your hand was up before. If there are no further questions of clarification of the officers, I would like to propose we move into debate. But before we move into debate, I just want to clarify one thing without wanting to teach to suck eggs, in that the conclusions, reading the report papers here we have tonight, the conclusions that the outcome that we're expecting from the debate and this meeting tonight are there's three items at the bottom of page 4. The action available to the Scrutiny Committee are to either A, take no action and the decision be implemented, B, ask Cabinet to reconsider the decision, or C, refer the matter to Council with or without a recommendation. And the expectation is that there will be a motion or a vote at the end of the meeting, or as we come to the closure of the meeting, to decide on one of those three. Ideally, if we can meet a collegiate way of achieving that, that would be wonderful. If not, we will just follow the process. As you know, I like to follow the process. So, open to debate. Who wants to start, please?
I mean, I don't think we've, well, I think that the argument set out in the paper that was submitted is pretty compelling. And I don't think I've heard anything tonight that persuades me that was either new to me or persuades me that it's the gist of it is wrong. Indeed, we've, to the point I was making earlier about the evidence base for these decisions, we've been collecting new evidence this evening about, for instance, plans for Hollybush Park, which suggests that the security of the decision is not that strong. And a lot of this was not done, to my mind, in a way which enabled people to clearly see that there was, in good faith, good conscience, clear evidence and clear thinking about why these decisions were being taken in the way that they were. So to put it on the table, or start for 10, my initial view is that it would make sense for us to say to the Cabinet, have another go at this. You've got a bit of time to do it in the next couple of months. Make sure that when you come to either confirming the decision or changing your mind, that there is catalogued the reasons and for the decision and the evidence that backs it up.
Jim wants to raise a point, please.
Sorry, Chair, if I can, just on one point that Councillor Lehman raised there, as per the scrutiny rules, if this committee refers this decision back to Cabinet for it to be reconsidered, that will happen within the next 10 working days. As such, there is a meeting, I believe, scheduled for next Tuesday. So when you say a couple of months, a couple of days is more like it.
Sarah would like to say something.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be really clear on that, there is no new evidence. I understand Councillor Lehman considers there is, but the officers did not present any new evidence. Detlev was very clear on the evening in terms of the work that had been undertaken in 2021, on which no decision was made by members, and the work that is being considered at the moment in terms of improvements to the Hollybush site, which there is no funding for at the moment, but it's how to improve that leisure offer on site. There has been absolutely no new evidence that's been presented by officers. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you. And just for the committee's awareness, that I have asked the officers to respond when I don't have the answers for clarification, because we all need their assistance here tonight. So thank you for your patience on that. So who else wants to add to the debate?
If I could just respond quickly. I mean, Councillor Robertson picked up the point about, I don't think we've heard before the argument that Hollybush Rec needs to be retained in order that the council doesn't have to go into borrowing money and for capital projects, or I forget the exact words, but that was the gist of it. I thought that was a new argument that we hadn't heard before.
Personally, I wouldn't have said that, and I haven't been party to all of the discussions, but I'm quite happy personally to accept that. Councillor Clack.
Yeah, I'm sort of semi-loath to say this, but the way I'm looking at it is that we've been given, the reason why it's been called in is that there are specific grounds which are given as to why the decision didn't comply with the policy. And I feel that really we ought to address, certainly in the primary reasons, address each point one at a time, because it seems to me that if those reasons are the ones that have been given, then I feel like to do it clear in my own mind whether we ought to do sort of one at a time. And I don't know whether we really, you know, I'm trying to be, I don't know if we really need to know exactly what's planned for Hollybush now, because I don't think that's because you haven't got a plan now exactly. Therefore that negates the council's ability to think that, well, actually we should keep it because there's things that we can do. And I think it was said earlier on that this isn't adversarial. It's not like you have to counter every point that's made on one side to the other side. It's the council's decision whether to ultimately, or the cabinet's decision whether to actually transfer something over or not. But as I said, it's just, I'm just interested on each individual point. And maybe that's just me, because I'm thinking if they're the reasons we're being asked to decide whether this should be called in, then we ought to look at each point one at a time in the primary grounds. I think the secondary grounds, I mean, well, anyway, I won't talk about secondary grounds.
Just for my clarification, when you say that the points that this was called in for, Councillor Clack, which pages are you referring to in the papers?
Sorry, yeah. So page 11. Yeah. So number 3, which says primary ground non-compliance with the disposal policy. Now I know we've touched upon a number of these things now, but it's just the way my logical mind works. Is that, you know, and then there's you know, A, Hollybush. They say cabinet assertion, policy requirements, evidence provided, conclusion. And if we're saying that there is a procedural wrong by the cabinet, and these are the procedural wrongs which are being identified, then shouldn't we satisfy ourselves with each one that there wasn't a procedural problem? Because if there is on one, then maybe there's a problem. But if there isn't on any of them, then there isn't a problem. Does that, again, I think it's the second time I've said, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I'm just going to seek counsel from the officers here just to see how we look at that. I'm mindful that I don't want to go down, you know, specific examples. I recognise where you've got case studies of a case of something. It doesn't allow us to go down the rabbit hole of discussing each site individually, but the procedural, I'm open to that, and I just want to seek clarification. Just bear with me a minute. Is going to speak for me through the chair.
Just one sentence. So as was said before, the disposals policy is not a policy which is in the council's policy framework.
You're shaking your head, Councillor Clack.
No, I'm not shaking my head. I'm just trying to figure out what that meant.
Now, would you like some further explanation of what that meant?
Okay, right. So under paragraph 5.1 of part 2 of the Constitution, the policy framework is defined, and it's defined as the plans and strategies attached at Appendix F. Appendix F is duly titled the Council's policy framework, and is a list of policies which the Council has specifically decided only it can change or deviate from, and the disposals policy is not one of those.
So if I summarise that, it's the disposals policy set by the government and we comply to it?
No, it's one of our policies. It's one of the very many policies which aren't in the policy framework. And it does mean that Cabinet could vary it or change it.
I understood all of the words.
So when the disposals policy is again reconsidered, it won't go to council, it'll go to cabinet. So it's not part of the policy framework. And that's a matter of fact, not opinion.
So, scratching my head there. Apologies for that. So, I'm going to ask Councillor Maskell to respond in that if we feel that we don't need to look at each of the individual elements here. We can ask the Cabinet to say, have these procedures and policies been fulfilled, and take their word for it.
I think what we're looking at here is when it's talking about primary ground, it says that the disposals policy forms part of the council's policy framework, where it actually doesn't in terms of, so I think it's important to identify that. However, the assessment process, we are satisfied in the Cabinet that those processes as identified within the disposal policy is covered. It doesn't necessarily require all of that information, but we can add to that in due course.
And would you feel that there's any merit in looking at recalling this from, if you've already looked at it?
It is already being looked at. I don't think there's any requirement to go through it again, to be quite frank.
Thank you. Right, next question. Who would like to speak next?
Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to
Lake.
start the delightful experience we had last week of always agreeing with Councillor Black. So I'm putting in an order for the second T-shirt for those who were there. I have questions, completely different parts, and I would really like clarification about the power of the disposals policy. It's a very simple question. As I understood it, it was adopted by Council in July 2025. Am I right? Is my memory right? Was it adopted by Council or was it adopted by Cabinet?
Council.
Council. If it was adopted by Council, where is the decision taken not to include it in the Constitution?
Through Martin,
But at council could have decided to have put it in the policy framework and it didn't.
So that was, so speaking personally, that was unclear to me. Usually, if I think we're passing something at full council, sorry, but it's not evident to me that if we agree a policy at full council, that it then effectively, what you're saying, it is advisory, that as it's not part of the Constitution, it means the Cabinet can choose when it suits to use the disposal policy or not. Not saying they do, but I'm saying legally the Cabinet is not required then to follow the disposals policy. Is either part of the Constitution and it is required or it isn't. Can someone clarify?
I can provide a brief answer, and Martin, correct me if I are out of alignment. My understanding is the disposal policy are one of, as of many others, which fall into the same category, that are amendable by the amendable by the council and the cabinet.
Oh yes, of course, it's amendable by council, but is it?
No, it's not.
It's not amendable by
May I?
council.
So as it's not in the framework, it won't need to go to council again. It's a cabinet document now. It's for them to marshal and to look after. Now, I wouldn't state it as Councillor Robinson stated it, to say that it's not legal. In fact, I think I'm misrepresenting what she said there. I wouldn't call it advisory, but it isn't part of the policy framework. So it can't found a call in on its own. That's not to mention, not to dispute any of the secondary ground, despite maybe a change in wording. I think the secondary ground does relate to something in the Constitution, whereas the first doesn't.
Thank you. I'm beginning to get clear on this. So if an appropriate committee on this council were to recommend to full council that it consider adopting the disposals policy into the Constitution, that is actually a step that is required, separate to adopting a policy. Is that my understanding?
through you, Chair. I haven't actually done the work, so I'm not going to say most, but I wouldn't be surprised if by far the most policies aren't in Appendix F. It's rare, I would say, but I haven't done the work. No, you've got Appendix. I don't believe members would have the list of all of the policies that were ever brought up at council and approved. What happens when we make policy is certain policies go to council and they're not part of the framework. A short number, 1 or 2 pages, or perhaps a page and a half, make a well-spaced list which are in the policy framework.
Thank you. It clarifies, but I'll leave it for now. I don't want to go around in circles, dancing on a needle. I have. I would like
Councillor
to
Maskell
agree
wanted
with
to say
Councillor Maskell. Oh, okay. I'll come back to why I agree with him.
Oh, that's a shame. I'll sit down again, Chair. Just to say, however, that within the policy, all of those elements that come under primary ground, they are all covered and documented. Surplus assessment, valuation of income analysis, service need or strategic need assessment, business case, a clear audit trail demonstrating compliance with statutory and RICS guidance is all included within the assessment. So there doesn't need to be anything added, and it doesn't need to go through the discussion that we were talking about in terms of council requirements.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you for that. Though with respect, scrutiny is allowed to decide through you, Chair, what we do and don't discuss. I would like to agree with Councillor Maskell that disposals policy is working. And I think it's a useful document. But the point about the call-in, and that's about the decision-making in the Constitution, is that it needs to be fully applied, and it needs to be applied in a transparent manner. I have no reason to doubt the officers saying that all the evidence and all the evaluation was carried out. I absolutely trust them on that. But the problem I have, and the reason I called in, is I couldn't see that evidence sufficient for the Cabinet to take the decision in public on the 21st. This is why I wanted to call it in. The evidence needs to be more transparent and out there. So in terms of the 5 requirements, the surplus assessment, the valuation or income analysis, the service need or the strategic need assessment, business case and the audit trail, these were missing as evidence presented to Cabinet in the appendices A and B on the evening of the 21st of April. Maybe they are there, but we need to see the work in public. These are about publicly owned assets. There is nothing private or commercially sensitive about this. It's about applying to transfer an asset or not, or refuse, from one public authority to another. And this work needs to be fully evidenced in a way that a member of the public can look at it and go, ah, yes, there are the 5 points. They have all been answered. And that was put in front of Cabinet in public. And that comes to the heart of why we are here this evening, because I cannot see them. And I can go through the details on page 12, but to follow your advice, Chair, and that of Councillor Clack, it's all set out there what is missing from the evidence presented to Cabinet on the 21st of April. And that is why we've called this in. This is not a call in to say, we don't agree with you. That is your decision. It's your prerogative. You are the executive. But it is important in terms of accountability to the public that we are seen to have presented that evaluation in public so that other people can come to the same conclusion. And I still feel very strongly that there is a lot of missing information. Might have been there behind the scenes, but it's a lot of missing information on the 21st of April. But otherwise, I agree with Councillor Maskell. The disposals policy works.
Thank you. To the point where you're starting to get a little bit repetitive there. However, I think Sarah wants to come back as an officer and make a comment.
I'm sure my colleague Detlev will as well, as we both did the assessments. I think just the reassurance really is that as the officers that did undertake these assessments is that I think the required documented evidence of surplus assessment, valuation of income analysis, service need or strategic need assessment, business case for CAT decisions, and a clear audit trail demonstrating compliance with statutory and risk guidance. All of that was actually applied within the appendices that we undertook, and it was within the information. It's really unclear to me how that information wasn't there. As someone that was directly involved in bringing together that information, there was a significant amount of work in line with the disposals policy and through the sort of work that we've undertaken for each of the community asset transfers. We've considered both in January and in April, and all of that information was there for members to decide. I mean, we're quite experienced in looking at disposals and community asset transfers over probably 15, 20 years between us. So we know how to undertake an assessment and what information to present to members, but Detlev may wish to add to that. Thank you, Chair.
I'm not sure what more I can add to what you just said, Sarah. But just to reiterate the disposals policy, because the disposals policy also provides a section on it in terms of an asset challenge that is undertaken by officers in terms of determining whether assets are surplus or not. For example, in many instances, we very clearly highlight that none of these assets that have been asked for transfer are surplus assets.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Maskell.
If I may, Chair, I said at the outset that there are a whole range of stages that have taken place with this information. I said to the committee, this has been taking place over a period of many months. Large amounts of information have been gathered. The various councils have been involved in being involved in what the assessment was, etc., in terms of all of these elements. The Cabinet has been in full view of all the information provided, and it's been examined. It's been to various committees, and Cabinet again. I'm not quite sure, other than publishing it, I don't quite know how much more information and how widely it can be conveyed and discussed and assessed than we actually already have. I am very confident that we had all the material in front of us. All members of Cabinet were involved in this. So I find it very difficult to understand the level at which all of this information needs to be provided in order for Cabinet to make a decision.
Councillor Leyland, you've been very patient. I know you've been waiting to ask a question.
Well, I don't usually speak, do I? So you better listen. Okay. I've listened. I've listened to the leader. I've listened to other councillors, and I don't know if I'm allowed to say what I'm minded to suggest here at this point or not.
If you don't say it, I won't know what you're going to say.
Okay. Well, my view is then, before I actually say what, is that in this particular case, and it's not always the case, I think we have to trust the officers and what they do and how they do it. So, you know, that's my view. So you can imagine what recommendation I would make, actually. You work that one out for yourselves. Okay.
So Lindor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to agree with Councillor Leyland that we've heard both sides of the argument. I think we also did hear them during the opening speeches as well, I feel. Yeah. So I'd be quite happy to go to a vote on whatever we're doing. The sign's not finished.
Without repetition.
I'll say something new, Chair. Of course, I trust the officers. I used to be one. I know how hard they work. The point about a cabinet decision on community asset transfer is that it is the councillors and the cabinet who are accountable to the public for the guardianship of assets and monies. It is not the officers who are responsible. And to place a burden on officers is unkind and unfair. A strategic decision needs to be clearly owned and taken by councillors. Of course, we trust the officers, but my point is that the evidence of the 21st of April was not sufficient for Cabinet. And Councillor Maskell has literally said, how much more can we do? And the answer I would suggest is to follow Councillor Clack's advice of last Thursday and acquire some independent legal advice, to actually meet other councils, because I'm assured these meetings have not yet taken place, and also to ensure the external auditor sees each business case that is to be refused and has an opinion on that, because there won't be many of those. Mostly the council is good at transferring. So how much more can we do? Those are the three things I recommend, because they've not been happening on this particular case. Thank you.
So as you're an advisory committee, I'm going to pass, unfortunately, Councillor Shea. So you know, it is at the chairman's discretion, and in this instance, it's not something that I have unless I know what you're going to say, I can't. With respect, no, but very kind offer to you. But in this instance, I'm going to stay, it's just for the members of the Scrutiny Committee to debate here. I think Councillor Maskell, do you?
Yeah, on a point of order on that, it's the wording then, to me, is unclear on our guidance. Can I just turn to, sorry, excuse all the paper, you know me, love it. Should be in this one. Disposals policy. Scrutiny function. Hang on, here we are. Call in. Appendix C, Scrutiny Committee, call in. Sorry, apologies. Keeping you.
Do you want Martin to help
no,
you?
it's notice of key decision. Protocol to be considered. Okay, 1824. Any non-member of the Scrutiny Committee who has signed a request to call in a cabinet decision may be allowed to speak at the call-in meeting, although precedence will be granted to members who sit on the committee. And then it says, and any speaking by non-members remains at the sole discretion of the chairman. I had interpreted that a non-member who calls in is allowed to speak, but a non-member who didn't call in can only speak at the sole discretion of the chairman. I'm very sorry if I've misunderstood that, but I think that sentence is not clear. Thank you. Could I take advice from the monitoring officer?
Martin will answer the question.
I've got 18. I'm having it pointed out to me that the numbers are different, but the rule I've got from the Constitution is it's similar wording, but not exactly the same. So any non-member of the Scrutiny Committee who has signed a request to call in a cabinet decision may be allowed to speak at the call-in meeting, although precedence will be granted to members who sit on the committee, and any speaking by non-members remains at the sole discretion of the chairman.
And the reason that I'm going to stick with where I'm at, because I think we're close to making a vote and a motion, and I respect that you want to contribute, and I thank you for your attendance, but I'm going to say, with respect, please allow me to follow my judgment. I think, go on. I don't know why my heart sinks always when you say I have one last request.
I didn't get a chance to say this, and I would like to say it loud and clear, and if nobody agrees with me, that's fine. But in my view, scrutiny's best course this evening, and the appropriate one, is to refer this decision back to Cabinet for reconsideration on a publicly viewable evidence basis, including that audit and legal. And I worry that if scrutiny doesn't do this evening, Cabinet's decision could remain seen as legally deficient and open to legal challenge. I do want to say those words tonight. Thank you, Chair.
I will answer that. And just because you didn't find the information doesn't just say, I know that you did, despite your, investigative prowess and your knowledge, it doesn't mean to say that it wasn't there. It's just, from what you have said, is that you haven't found it. If I can paraphrase, but Councillor Clack wants to make a comment or question as well, please.
Yeah, so from what has been said is that it's being said that that information was there. So, I mean, would it be? So, I mean, if it's there, it's there. That's I don't know.
Councillor Askell or Sarah.
Thank you. I think just Detlev and I just would like to just add a couple of things based on the questions tonight. I think just if I can refer members to the adopted disposals policy, just to be clear on what officers actually present to members of both FIAC and Cabinet when they are considering this within their documents. It's all within the disposals policy and it is all within the documentation. So we will submit a committee report for Cabinet decision recommending a disposal at less than best consideration, structured as follows. The property plan description and location, so that could be title, purposes for which powers under which property is held, current uses in planning context, all of which goes within the reports for each, if applicable. Proposed transaction and justification, so that's details of proposed purchaser, aims and objectives of purchaser, nature of organisation and governance structure, evidence of purchaser's financial ability to fulfil the obligations of the transaction, details of what purchaser intends doing with it, details of engagement with users, local people and service users, details of how proposed transaction benefits the organisation's key objectives, indication of local demand and need for the identified benefits, details of key terms and restrictions proposed, compliance with state subsidy, details of options appraisal and cost benefit analysis and evaluation report. So all of that information is something that through the adopted disposals policy, officers are bound to present to members, and that's what we present each time. And then if I can, it's probably then helpful just to look at then what the interested party needs to put forward, and that's the requesting organisation, to help council make its decision, because that actually forms part of the information that Cabinet officers look at in Cabinet considering their decision. So a description of the nominated land, including its proposed boundaries, the reasons for requesting the asset, explaining how it meets the requesting organisation's objectives, plans, and fulfils its statutory duties if applicable, information about the outcomes to be achieved by the requesting organisation in providing the service, how the asset will be used and the aims and objectives of the requesting organisation, how the requesting organisation will promote or improve the socio-economic or environmental well-being of the relevant authority's area, and how it will meet the needs of users, why the requesting organisation believes the asset transfer provides socio-economic environmental well-being reasons, negating the need for best consideration, and describe those benefits, quantifies and or qualifies the benefits outlined above, provide an unrestricted open market valuation for the site, how the asset will be maintained, and confirmation that there is sufficient budget. Sorry, I know this is going to go on, but it's just to be really clear of what officers actually look at. On receipt of the above information, the council then reviews the application, prepares the committee report, recommending a disposal or asset transfer as necessary should it align with the council's policies, plans and strategies, which I think Councillor Maskell did outline those strategies that we look at as officers, including council plan, local plan, housing strategy, economic and sort of regeneration plans, etc. It's then for Cabinet to determine the nature of the tenure, whether that's a licence, leasehold, common hold or freehold, and then what appropriate uses such as asset lock and clawback provisions. So it's all within the adopted disposals policy. It is so easy for both officers and applicants to follow, and that's the information and the process that we go through each time. And it's really clear in the appendices that we provide.
That's really thorough, really clear, Chair. I just wanted to add at the end, though. It just so happens that we have 3 disposals, or sort of community asset transfers, that have not been accepted. I'm just wondering if that is the reason why we're here tonight. If the other disposals were working effectively and efficiently, I just wondered whether that was the reasoning behind it, and a bit concerned that on that.
Before you do, Councillor Lehman, I just want to ask Sarah one question. Is if all this information is being collected, how easy, where has this been presented to, and how accessible is it, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to assist Sarah on that, that information is included in the Cabinet and the Advisory Committee reports as Appendix A and Appendix D. And in addition to that, also Appendix B, if I recall correctly, in terms of the valuation advice and information. And the financial information is included in the financial section, which has also been reviewed by colleagues in finance, and that's included in the main body of the report.
Councillor Lehman.
I don't want to speak for long, but I just say to Councillor Maskell, we're not here to question each other's motivations for what we do. This is a judgment for the committee. It's not. It's not a judgment about whether the officers believe they provided the right information. It's not even a judgment about whether the leader or the cabinet felt they had the right information. It's about it's about a judgment of the committee, having debated this, about whether the cabinet did have the right information and used the information in the correct way to form a judgment which could be justified on the basis of the information and the evidence they had before it. And that's the exam question. A lot of all these other stuff is interesting, but not core to what we're here to do as a scrutiny committee, and why the call-in was accepted by the Chief Executive.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to Councillor Leyland. You had something else that you were going to suggest you wanted to ask. Would you like to ask that now? Will you? You put your microphone, please.
The answer was no. And I've made my mind up exactly what I'm going to do. Thank you.
So I'm led to, I thought you wanted to share what you were going to do, but if that's not the case, that's fine. And in that instance, let me just speak with the office. I'm looking for the page. I know where it is. Bottom page 4. So oh yeah, it's there as well. So from my perspective, as from the chair, I am going to make a proposal and make a motion that we take no action and the decision to be implemented, and ask you to vote on that, because I think that there's a mixed feelings here. And if you're happy to do that, will those of you who want to vote for the motion, please raise your hands. No, just one. So you get the one crack. So there's just one. I'm taking the view here that I'm satisfied with what the discussion where it's gone to. I thought that there were two people or two members that wanted to make the motion. I can make the motion through the chair saying that I propose that we take no action and the decision be implemented, and for those who will then vote for that proposal. No, because it's coming through the chair. So if those of you want to raise your hands to say that we follow A, take no action, the decision should be implemented, please raise your hands. And for those against, please. 3. Sorry. So the motion is carried. I think that then concludes us to the end of the meeting. Thank you very much.